Larry Go Lucky has admitted that he made contact in Prague with yeah, that's right. Yeah, you fucking guessed it. Susie Ann Nemavoski. And Nemavoski's denial that she knew Steve Bobutnik. Well, that's going out the window. That's part of Mueller's trap.
All right. Yeah. Okay, folks, buckle up. We have confirmed intel from the FBI that Michael Cohen was in contact with Dr. Robotnik. It's only 10:15 a.m.
What happens to it's only 3 o'clock guy? That guy, that's my favorite.
Mueller Report.
That's my favorite Trump Russia guy because he could just be making up half of those and I wouldn't know because I haven't been following this for 2 years. And he's just like, Robert Mueller just said that Donald Trump has a small dick. And I'm like, it's only 1 p.m. I don't even know. I haven't even checked the time. You could be telling me anything. I don't know.
It's 1 p.m. in Sydney, Australia.
I mean, it's sort of like I was thinking about this. Like, it's sort of why I don't feel like too smug having gotten this one right because it didn't involve like a great amount of research or insight on my part.
No,
I was just like, oh, there's Eric Garland and Louise Mensch, and people are taking them seriously. They've obviously gone insane. Like,
you know what this is like for me? This is like, I mean, what do you even get right? Just that, like, Donald Trump isn't literally a Manchurian candidate.
Yeah.
Like, everything else,
what you get right is that Donald Trump is too stupid and too prone to talking about anything that happens to him to ever sit down and have a meeting where they say, we're going to collude to swing this election, because he would have immediately tweeted about it.
I made a great deal.
You'll never guess what I just talked to.
So this is what this reminds me of, this thing that I was just too lazy and bored to follow for 2 years. And I was like kind of right about it, where I was like, yeah, he probably like isn't an agent of the FSB. I'm going to assume that. It reminds me of like, my mom being like, you have to do good in the ACTs to, be a successful adult. No, I don't. No, I just kept doing what I was doing and I was right. And it's one of the best deals I've ever made.
The other thing is I always personally kind of buy the theory that Trump wasn't trying to win. So why would he even make a quid pro quo?
Yeah,
that was manifestly obvious to everybody who was covering it at the start. I mean, it was pretty clear that he was winging it. He had absolutely no strategy whatsoever. I mean,
it's probably officially start. We're sitting here with Matt Taibbi to talk. We're talking Russiagate, baby. And no, Matt, you lay out in your latest piece in Rolling Stone. I don't want to repeat ourselves too much on this show because we've said for a while now that this Russia thing is just like a convenient excuse for a political and media class to kind of wash their hands of this, traumatic event of Trump being elected president and everyone being wrong about it.
At best, an excuse, at worst, an actual cudgel they use against the left.
Yeah.
But you talk about what covering him in the 2016 campaign was like, and you make the point that he wasn't trying to win.
Right.
He just it got too far before he could ever go back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was funny. I was talking to Matt about this the other day. Do you remember when Howard Stern ran for governor of New York on the Libertarian Party line?
Oh my God, that's right. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. He put it out there. I remember this distinctly because that was when he was king of all media, and he packed the Libertarian Party convention with his supporters. That's how he got the nomination. And I remember watching as a teenager on C-SPAN, and it was just a static shot of the dais. And it was a complete zoo. Like there was like an old guy with the elbow patches, sort of, like a real Nozick, firebrand, just yelling about how this was a disgrace and this was awful. And it was, Ayn Rand was spinning in her grave. And then I swear to God, it'll be in my head till I die. A Baba Booey looking motherfucker in, I think, like a tan windbreaker just walks up to the empty dais, pulls a dildo out of his pocket, and just goes, I got a dildo. I got a dildo.
I mean,
and then he got the nomination.
Perfect.
I remember being...
But then, and his only two planks were he wanted to fill all the potholes in New York City and he wanted to bring back the death penalty.
The two most libertarian positions.
But then, once it was like, okay, you're going to have to disclose your income and, you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z, he just said, I'm out.
Yeah, exactly.
This is too serious.
Yeah.
It was that, but it was also the polling showed that he had actual shot at getting elected governor.
Yeah.
And Stern, I think to his credit, was just like, no, like this is too ridiculous. I can't be governor of New York State.
Right, yeah.
You know, and like there's a harbinger of things to come. Trump obviously lacked that, that breaker.
yeah.
in
The
his
regulator,
mind.
yeah.
Exactly.
Including remembering all the shit he said on Howard Stern about drilling a hole in the wall at Miss Universe to pick on teens like he's in fucking Porky's.
Did he do that? I don't know.
He did.
Yeah.
He bragged about it.
He just like went on Howard
He's getting
Stern.
sued for it.
He went on Howard Stern like he was meeting with his own Oppo people to get ahead of stuff. Like,
And it didn't matter. It's
Right.
amazing. Everything
Right.
just broke.
Yeah.
Everything broke, and there had to be someone responsible. And it's like Putin.
Yeah, no, psychologically, just people weren't ready for the whole thing.
And I was
think.
thinking about it,
Yeah.
like the only thing that's like really comparable, like in my lifetime or modern American history, to like the effect that the election of Donald Trump had in breaking people's brains
9/11.
was 9/11.
Yeah.
Because it was
Yeah.
like it's the exact same things. It's like a movie.
Yeah.
You know, like all the red
The
signs are
uncanny
blinking
feeling.
red, but nobody, knew. Nobody knew any better except for a few people who were, screaming like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. or
Right,
something.
right, exactly.
And except in this time, it's sort of like the shoe is on the other foot because it's primarily, it's the Democrats and liberals who are the ones that feel, agree, they're on the shoes on the other foot.
Exactly. It's sort of the opposite political context, and it is true that something like 90% of the press votes Democratic, right?
Mhm.
So that's a thing, and that was a factor with the WMD case because there was some room politically to talk about the fact that it was fucked up.
Yeah.
But in this case, it just got momentum, and it couldn't stop.
And we've talked about why this is the perfect excuse a lot, but one of the things you go into in your Rolling Stone piece is how, in addition to creating this whole narrative about Trump and Russia and treason and collusion, they were also like going along with it, this idea that if you didn't buy it or were just like, I think this is bullshit, or like something about this doesn't seem right, that it was sort of like this idea that you were signifying some kind of covert alliance with Trump and fascism, and that you're helping him in a way, when in fact, as you lay out in this piece, like the exact opposite is true.
Exactly. This literally was the only thing that the press could do to completely, fuck things up. I mean, all they had to do, if you tell the truth about Donald Trump, it's going to hurt him every single time, But the one thing that they couldn't do was be over their skis with facts and validate all those things that he was saying in his tweets about how, we are, we're so against him that we're making things up. And now he doesn't have to do anything to run for re-election in 2020. Now he can run on this forever, right?
I don't know. I mean, like his approval rating, I think the day-to-day approval ratings are kind of fucking meaningless.
Right.
But it's not like we've seen a huge upshoot so far. I feel like he will essentially have the same problems he would face whether Mueller was like, guess who met with Michael Ian Gavin about the Karanovich affair. Like
Right.
if Mueller had said that, whatever the people were talking about for 2 years, I think he would generally have the same problems running for re-election. But it does, he could definitely use this as a cudgel in a way, and it really fires up the base. They're super excited about it.
It's a huge class issue to me because it's just about it started even before Russiagate started. I think. I mean, with the press, he definitely went after us because we are dorky looking upper class people who live in Washington and New York, and in those crowds, and it's the setup and the speeches makes it look particularly bad because we're literally above everybody else on risers with ropes around us to keep all the herd out.
We experienced that when we were at CPAC and we were in the media zone and people were getting mad at us because we were blocking their view.
Exactly.
Of the great one.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if you go to a baseball game or whatever it is, and there just happened to be 50 Jim Acosta standing on a riser in front of you so that you can't see the game. I mean,
That's why they keep at baseball games. They keep the luxury seats way back. You can't see them. You can't get mad at them and be thinking about how much money they spent. And
exactly
That represents the deep state.
Really
To
does.
be fair about CPAC, I was wearing a novelty sombrero with a press ticker in it. It was so big. I'm still having neck problems, but I wanted people to respect me. I'm sorry. I just wanted people to know I was a member of the press. I apologize to everybody.
But like, if the Democrats, like after the election of Trump, had intended to actively help him and make this obviously craven fraud seem less so, it's hard to imagine how they could have done anything better than go
Right.
all in on the collusion, treason shit. Because if they had just like left that aside, the Mueller report would have him absolutely dead to rights, paying off a porn star like a week before an election in like obvious campaign fraud.
Right, and
That's pretty good,
that's,
right?
That is very good. It's also impeachable, I think. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
I mean, it's questionable whether politically that would work, but it's that you could throw a dart at basically any business venture that he's ever been involved with, and it would resonate powerfully if they had done that instead, right? If you had looked at Trump University with 19 investigators, like imagine the shit that would have come out of that, right? I mean,
That
everybody.
people got a sort of shoddy substandard education. There was some grade inflation going on there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then they got in debt. I mean, that would.
I'm imagining some rich parent like bribing Trump to get their kid into Trump
Dave
University.
Coulier did that, I heard.
I swear he's a water polo prodigy. Get him in.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, if they had tried, they couldn't have done worse. And obviously, we still have to see what's in the report. But the thing that they sold more than anything else was that one piece of it. The Manchurian Candidate story, and it's just such a bad error, and he's gonna harp on it, and he's never gonna let us forget
Man,
it.
he was just feeling himself at that Michigan rally. Holy fuck. I mean, I thought he was moist at CPAC. He was positively dewy.
He was drip or die there.
Yeah,
Like,
it's just like little Adam Schiff, his thin little neck, tiny little neck, Adam Schiff. Not like the Great Lakes; those are deep.
I support the Great Lakes. Always have. They're beautiful. They're big, very deep. Record deepness, right?
I love
Incredibly
that.
deep.
The one most incorrect thing he could say about the Great Lakes, that they're really deep.
Superior is very deep. I do like that he said, "I've always been a supporter of the Great Lakes."
Not the deep, just the lakes themselves.
Just like it's 1985. He's at Studio 54, like trying to talk, Cheryl Teague's into bed, and he's just also thinking about like Lake Erie and how to support it.
Larry Silverstein came up to me and said, one time, $2 billion, we destroy Lake Erie. I said, no, it's a good lake. There are a lot of fish there. They have their little neighborhoods. They got their fish schools.
Do people have
fish schools,
positions
they
on
swim
the Great
around.
Lakes? Is that a thing that people talk like? I don't know.
Wait, which?
I think Hillary Clinton did pledge to drain one of them, and I don't think that went over. No, we said before we recorded, Virgil, you said that like the way we've talked about it over the last few years is just like it's a running joke on the show. It's just something we refer to.
Yeah,
because
if you had listened to the show for the past 2.5 years, you probably would not, and this was the only thing you listened to, you probably would not even know who Robert Mueller is.
Yeah,
Like,
if your captor has been doing that, you are woefully
No, there's one
We're
thing you would know
sorry.
about Robert Mueller. You would know that his bussy wide AF and wilded out, because the one thing I do remember is Felix talking about fantasizing about getting railed by Robert Mueller.
The woman who posted the Robert Mueller sex. That was the most we've ever covered Mueller. Was
And-
the woman who was like, I would love to get dicked down by Robert Mueller on Twitter.
this would probably, like, your knowledge of the Mueller investigation, Russiagate, would just seem like an inside joke that we invented on this program. And the way we've talked about it is really only as a launching point to analyze, one, the sort of structures in the media and politics that led us to our current hell state, and two, as a shared pathology of a certain subset of liberals, which probably numbers in the millions, whose brains have been irrevocably broken by the election of Donald Trump. But compare our show with basically every other political podcast that did emergency pods about
Bombshells.
about James Bort getting getting indicted for
That's a
stealing
boom.
a submarine.
That's a boom.
Yeah, that was the thing. It would always be like the only angle of the Mueller investigation I deeply know is that Roger Stone has like a gang of sickly old men who he abuses and who ended up turning on him, like Randy Credico and
Jerome Corsi.
Jerome Corsi claiming that Roger Stone was trying to kill him by tweeting at him meanly so that he would have a heart attack. That was hilarious.
That's just like going up to the judge naked and lying down on the floor and moaning. Please.
Trump seems to surround himself with old men that he makes humiliate themselves for his amusement.
Yeah, and all of them would be like, at 3:45 a.m., Roger Stone called me and said, "I'm going to slit your dog's throat, you fat fuck." And it was like, I don't know what this has to do with like Russia. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, the
but,
Trump
like,
organization is organized as well as the bum fight videos.
yeah. And that was like, so Roger Stone is interesting to me because he has the same, like he's as impressive a political operative as Jacob Lowell, but he was just lucky to be in a time before the internet.
Yeah.
When people couldn't easily like look something up and be like, yeah, you're lying. But because Trump is like, yeah, Trump's like, this guy's the best. He's so smart. He just says whatever.
Have you met my friend Roger Stone? Yeah, exactly.
He was like crucial to whatever operation. But that was the only angle I was following. Just Roger Stone's gang of ailing old men turning on him. If Roger Stone goes to jail, that's pretty funny. I don't know.
It should. I thought that should have been a suspension of disbelief moment for the entire crew of prosecutors. The moment that Jerome Corsi started to become a character in this whole thing, they should have backed off and been like,
Yeah. Like
maybe we took a wrong turn somewhere.
You're just imagining like an FSB agent meeting Jerome Corsi in an underground garage, and he's like scrolling through Pepe memes. It's like, look, here I am as a groiper. And he's like, yes, very impressive.
Yeah,
Like we might have picked the wrong horse here.
You survived like the greatest collapse in life expectancy and life quality in your like you rose back through the ranks. You've cut so many throats. You've been through literally cutthroats. Like you've killed oligarchs, all this shit, and then you just meet this guy in like a pinstripe suit, but the pants are cut fucked up.
All that work to get here, right?
Yeah, he's wearing like suspenders and a belt with a skull on it and a top hat. He's wearing like, so he'll be like, so as you see, I have 3 dying men who I abuse. And they're like, yeah, okay.
So obviously for us, sort of an inside joke, but like for everything else, like Russiagate, it's just like everything else. It just sort of evolved into a kind of a signifier or a shorthand that everyone kind of forget what it was about, but people are obsessed with it. And I think now it's just become sort of like a marker for whether in the online economy, whether you've been owned or not.
Yes.
I'd like to be clear. Well, let me be clear. We have not been owned.
We have not been owned.
Yes, we have not been owned.
We have not been owned.
But it's easy to forget there was a real story here. I mean, like whether it's a con, a delusion, a conspiracy theory, for any of those to work, it has to be based on something. Like they're not.
Well,
like,
okay, so this is actually an important point because this was one of the first problems that I had with this with any news story. You want to know what the beginning is.
Yeah.
I hate to draw this comparison, but like this happened to me with Deflategate. I was actually interested. I was interested because I'm a football fan. I was interested in investigating Deflategate, and I kind of like on my spare time started to ask questions from all the teams. I even asked. They sent me to interview Andrew Luck, and I even asked him about it. But I got like 4 different answers about how it started. Like one person said it was the Ravens who started it. Another person said somebody intercepted a ball in one of the previous games, and then another person said it was somebody had seen something at the RCA Dome in the previous game that led them to think the Patriots were messing with the balls. But I could never get a straight answer, and to me that was important because if they had a legitimate reason to test the balls, then the story's totally different, right? And but I could never find out what it was, so I didn't feel comfortable writing about it. Here, we don't know what started Russiagate. We still don't know. There's no definitive account of what started the investigation.
Well, I mean, you just released a chapter from an upcoming book, right?
Right, yeah.
Hate Inc. That's all about this, and you do like a really detailed sort of timeline of, as best you can, following the entire story, like every step along the way. And in this chapter, at least, even though it's sort of hard to say where it begins, you sort of begin with the Steele Dossier.
Right.
I mean, it goes back a little before that, but that's like the sort of, you think that was kind of the hook?
Well, that was where it started to become public, but this is the problem. The investigation, right? We know that there was an FBI investigation that started at the end of July in 2016. And they've had like 3 different explanations for how this started. One was that the FBI was interested in this guy, George Papadopoulos. There was another one where the FBI was following Carter Page. And there's a third one where the British analog to the NSA, the GCHQ, their head, Robert Hannigan, intercepted something that worried them, flew to Washington, told the head of the CIA, who in turn told the FBI. But they never told us what it was. They kind of hinted at this story over and over again. So that was a huge red flag to me right away. Like, if you can't, like with Watergate, you know what the story is. Like, it starts with a break-in. Like, here we don't
tape along the fucking door. You don't tape
right? Yeah, exactly.
vertical, not horizontal, idiots.
Here's another
It's
sort
almost
of
like they wanted to get
a red
that.
flag for me. Like, as far as the Steele dossier goes, I think it should have been a tip-off that the guy who created this dossier was a former British spy named Christopher Steele. It's like, get the fuck out of here. Christopher Steele?
My favorite 90s porn star.
But you
Steele.
compare him in this chapter to, like, he's sort of the Ahmad Chalabi of this whole fiasco.
Yeah,
he's
right.
the screwball, like, source for the public claims.
Well,
So
yeah.
what was the Steele dossier and what was in it?
So the Steele Dossier, the Democrats, the Democratic National Committee, hired a law firm called Perkins Coie to do basically Oppo research on Trump. They hired this firm, Fusion GPS, which does this kind of stuff. They dig up, dirt on political candidates. And at some point, they hired this guy, Christopher Steele. And it's worth noting that before this happened, they hired this guy in like June of 2016. There were already rumors like kicking around Washington about something to do with Trump and Russia. Like, reporters were talking about this. So they hired this guy who's got bona fides. He used to work for the MI6 and was the station chief in Moscow in the early 90s, but he hadn't been there in a long time. And he put together a series of memos. But the thing that's amazing to me is the first memo has the P-tape. It has the 5-year plan to, apparently Putin's been cultivating this Manchurian candidate for 5 years. It has that he's being blackmailed. In other words, this guy, within days, having not looked at this story, comes up with the intelligence coup of the century, literally overnight, And they started shopping this around to reporters. We all heard the rumors in the early fall of 2016, but nobody would report it because we couldn't confirm it. And then they cooked up this weird scam where basically all the intelligence chiefs handed it to Trump after he got elected and leaked the news of the meeting, which allowed all the reporters to talk about this report. Finally,
You talk about how this is a trick that's used often in Washington and Wall Street. If you want to publicize unconfirmed private research.
right? Yeah.
Like, you just like explain a little bit more about how that scam works.
Okay, so I've done a couple of stories about this. So, you have a short seller who wants to knock down a stock, right? So let's say there was a company called Fairfax Insurance, a bunch of guys bet against. So they hired some slimy investment bank to do a negative research about the report, a report. Then they basically went to the FBI and said, hey, can you take a look at this? It's really important. Their books are wrong. They're cheating their investors, blah, blah, blah. The instant the FBI takes possession of the report, they call up a friendly reporter and they say, this company's under investigation, right? So everybody times their bets perfectly. They know the story's coming out the next day. The reporter does the story, the stock goes down for about 10 minutes, and everybody wins. It's like an old trick. But it doesn't mean the stuff in the report is real. It just means that you're reporting on the journey of the report. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So if you're a reporter, then it becomes like a story not about that's unverifiable. It becomes a story about like, well, the FBI is looking into X.
The FBI is looking into it. Somebody handed it to somebody else. We know that the CIA gave it to Trump, right, and informed him that there was blackmail material out there. And I mean, the huge red flag there was that Comey hands this thing to Trump and says, "I promise, sir, this is going to be close held," right? And within fucking 5 seconds, every news organization in Washington knows all about this meeting, and they have the reason that they need to publish it, which again should have been another red flag.
But you mentioned other examples of this kind of private oppo thing, which is like in and of itself not inherently good or bad.
No,
and has like led to some useful
Enron.
The Enron story.
Enron was a big one. Yeah, Bethany McLean was the reporter they gave it to, and it was a similar thing. They had people who were betting against that company because people were looking at it; they could see it was a scam. So they did a report, and they got a reporter who was good, and that turned into a big story. But there are some negative examples too, like the Arkansas Project was. Involved Whitewater and the Clintons. They just generated tons and tons of stuff, and it was hard for reporters to sort out what was real and what wasn't. And after a while, it just turned into, just a lot of noise that appeared in the press, and this led to, a special prosecutor investigation and all kinds of other stuff. So.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, wasn't there something to do with the Steele dossier where it was like they were also going to look into Hillary Clinton and vet her? And then they were like, "Oh, well, we couldn't find anything."
Yeah, there's a line
on Bill or Hillary. They're clean as a whistle.
It's that to me was a huge tell. It's actually mentioned twice in the report that the Russians are keeping a file of compromat on Hillary Clinton, but there's nothing in it because it's just a bunch of meaningless conversations rather than any embarrassing or improper conduct. And they mentioned this twice, and I'm like, why would they mention that? Like, who, first of all, I doubt it. You know what I mean? Like if the Russians have been monitoring the Clintons, and they have, certainly for 2 years, for 2 decades, I'm pretty sure there's something in that file. But they made a point in the report to mention that twice, which to me suggested that it was written for public consumption. They meant for somebody to read it, which they say isn't true. They say it was just for their private clients. So. But you can't prove that one way or the other. It just felt that way. It was a reason to look at the document and be a little bit skeptical. That's all.
It's so baffling to me that you're going to do Trump Oppo, and you're going to just hire some syphilitic James Bond to make shit up when he just has done every crime you could think of.
Exactly.
One thing that I didn't hear from the Clinton campaign. The fact that when he was building Trump Tower, he hired a bunch of Polish illegal immigrants, to build the fucking thing, and then fucking had them deported before paying.
Right, exactly.
I didn't see that in any ads.
They investigated the one crime that Donald Trump did not
single crime.
He's done every single crime. He's done like even the weird crimes that are still on the books, like he watched an Irishman on Sunday.
I tied up my horse after sundown. They couldn't stop me.
I mean, I lent my falcon for the purpose of falconry to a friend. It wasn't for a photo shoot. He used it for hunting.
Yes, he did. Even that.
There was when he was talking, they interviewed him like after The Apprentice started, and he's like, I didn't want to do it because I meet with a lot of people every day. I meet with members of the mafia who don't want to be recorded.
Yeah. He bragged all the time. He bragged about his mafia connections all the time. Like he thought it was cool that he was on first name basis with all the Gambino Chapo regimes.
That's the coolest thing.
But the thing is that the real joke of all of this is they could have fucking talked about that stuff, and guess what? It wouldn't have mattered anyway because the vacuum of Hillary Clinton's awful candidacy was always going to win out.
Right, exactly.
And no amount of, because he was such a comically corrupt figure, but everyone kind of absorbed that. And then they were still like, yeah, but Hillary? And there was no counter to that because the corruption clung to the Clintons the same way. And people were like, if all things are equal, I want someone who at least acknowledges there's a problem and, says the word jobs once in a while. And that's all it took.
I mean, that to me was a huge sort of unremarked fact about the election, that basically 1 in 5 voters disapproved of both candidates, right? and we're talking about people who voted,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You know, so
Yeah.
that doesn't even include the people who didn't vote. And of those voters, Trump had something like a 2-to-1 advantage. So that was his main constituency. His winning constituency was the people who didn't like him.
Yeah, it's
right?
like if it's all bad, let me shake it up.
Right, yeah,
Something
exactly.
something different than business as usual, because I know business as usual doesn't work.
Right, exactly.
Going back to the Rolling Stone piece you did, one thing you mentioned that I hadn't considered before is that Jeb Bush's and Hillary Clinton's strategy to attack Donald Trump were identical to one another, which means that Hillary Clinton saw it fall flat on its face in the Republican primary and decided to do it again in the general.
It was unbelievable. I mean, covering Jeb's campaign was one of the weirdest things I've ever been through. He did an event in a pharmacy. I can't remember the name of the town in New Hampshire, but it was a small ass pharmacy. It was like a little pharmacy, and he comes and he's like alone in the pharmacy. People have they've announced it, but there aren't enough people there. There's like a few people in the aisle, so they rope off half the pharmacy so that it starts to look more full, right? And it's still
It's an old trick. Put them in the adult diapers and feminine hygiene section.
Yeah. Tarp off the top of the Oakland Coliseum.
But he couldn't even. Eventually, he filled like about an aisle of a pharmacy. And that they spent $150 million on that campaign.
God, unbelievable.
They got 3 delegates, so
It's gotta be the most-
$50 million a delegate.
It's number one ever in terms of like wasted money in the history
totally.
of politics.
Yeah, it's not even
and
close.
Hillary watched that and she's like, hell yes, I'm doing it. This is my guy. I may not be Tinkerbell, but I'm asking you to please clap.
Virgil, when we were in New Hampshire, we saw the billboard.
The billboard when you
that
drive
he-
into Manchester.
Yeah, like the thing that every reporter vote, like they're all going to see it. It's just in quotations. Donald Trump is unhinged. Jeb Bush.
Yeah, that big red billboard that he spent $35 million on.
that was Jeb Bush's campaign was like the greatest transfer of wealth from like just like sort of old money billionaires to sort of new money shitty consultants ever. It was like a petite bourgeois revolution. It was actually kind of beautiful.
Well, looking at the home stretch of the Hillary campaign, I assume that their general strategy was, and this is a rule of thumb in political campaigns: if your opponent is imploding, stay out of the way,
Right.
Let it happen. And I think they assume that, this was after the Access Hollywood tape came out, and after all these news articles, these long reads coming out just about the general criminality of Trump's business dealings. They thought, the media will just do our dirty work for us. And that's, as I understand it, one of the central topics of Hate Inc. And I want to go back to the start of that. And you are serially publishing this, right?
Yeah. On a site, it's Taibbi.substack.com. I got approached a while ago by this new company called Substack, and contractually I couldn't just blog or write. So I thought about doing books, and I had some of my favorite writers had serialized books, so I started to serialize a couple of books. Well, I did one that was I co-authored with a drug dealer, which was called The Business Secrets of Drug Dealing, and then I did this one, which is
Could you just like text me his contact?
and then this one is about the media, which it started out as kind of like a rethink of manufacturing consent, but then it just turned into like, boy, it turned out I had a whole lot of like bottled up shit about things I didn't like about this business, and just started pouring out.
I've been reading it. It is a brutal and specific takedown of the media, especially viewed through the prism of the way they utterly fucked up the 2016 election. And I highly recommend anyone listening to this go on taibbi.substack.com and subscribe to it. And you said, so this is, you got the imprimatur of Chomsky.
Right. Yeah. I went to go visit him and just sort of asked him if it would be all right for me to kind of rethink the whole, because his whole thing was about basically.
Is this like the To Kill a Mockingbird sequel where he just he's senile?
If you don't want me to write it, nod twice.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, come on.
It's like-
Chomsky's not like Harper Lee. He's still fucking pretty. He's still sharp.
No, he was cool with it, and but it turned out to not really be like that. It turned into much more about some very specific things about the business, and in particular about political journalism and how we screw it up all the time, and
Well,
the groupthink especially. which this turned out to be like a classic example of.
You compare like the Russiagate story to the weapons of mass destruction story, and obviously, like, you're careful to say, like, in terms of the actual effect it's had on the world, WMD at the end of the day, that probably killed like 1 million or so people,
right? Yeah, exactly.
And it's killing people to this day.
Yeah, to this day. However, like, you do make a comparison in terms of like how intel from intelligence sources were stovepiped to credulous or willing members of the media. Could you compare to like how that stovepiping worked during the run up to the Iraq War and to the Russiagate story?
Yeah, so stovepiping originally was this thing that Seymour Hersh wrote about it. I think it was actually called The Stovepipe was the name of the article. And the whole idea was Dick Cheney was tired of hearing from other points of view in the intelligence community, and he wanted to basically stick a pipe down through into the agencies so he could get the analysis.
A dumbwaiter.
Yeah, exactly. he wanted the raw data that fit what he wanted to hear, and he wanted to be able to pull it up without having dissenting people clean it out. And so he takes this stovepiped information, and then he used this laundering technique to get it before the public. And this is this is the kind of thing, if you're a reporter and this happens to you, it's a big red flag. Like, basically what they would do is they would give somebody a scoop, right? They would say, oh, we found out that they're like, importing yellow cake uranium from Africa, and but off the record, right? Like, or anonymously. So the New York Times or somebody would do that story, and then Cheney would go on TV that day and say, well, according to the New York Times, Saddam Hussein is importing uranium from Africa. So it's a trick. They're laundering, right?
Can we just edit in the sound drop of Brad Pitt from Burn After Reading going,
I think that's the shit, man. The raw intelligence.
This is the real raw shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But,
I remember he went on, he would like meet the press that Sunday.
Meet the press that same day.
Yeah. New York Times, we've known that he sought a significant quantity of uranium from Niger.
Right. And if you're the editor of the New York Times, how do you not at that moment know you've been fucked, right? Like at that exact moment, they should have just backed out, right? I mean, there were like 90 moments like that before the war that should have just told reporters something is really off here, right? The British published an intelligence dossier in February, about a month before the invasion, that within days was revealed to have been plagiarized from a student thesis written from at Cal State University 13 years before. and this came out in the news. This was their argument for invading Iraq. They took from a student thesis from Cal State University.
My favorite example of that we talked about in one of the very, very early episodes of this show was, I think it was in the curveball shit. He talked about like Saddam's chemical nerve agents had the elegant pearl-like construction that was directly taken from Michael Bay's The Rock.
Really elegant string of pearls configuration. Unfortunately, incredibly unstable.
Yeah.
Which has literally never existed.
Yep.
A
It's
pure
just
invention
from a
of that
movie.
movie. Those like anal beads, like neon balls of VX nerve gas. That was entirely
Just so he
taken
could put
from
that one
movie.
in the guy's mouth and
Yeah.
pop it open.
Something like that should be a little bit of a tell, don't you think?
So what were some examples of the Russia story of this happening?
Well, the Steele thing was that was the major example, because it's private, unconfirmed research. And first of all, why is the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA, why are they giving us something that some guy who was hired by a law firm, who's some out of work spy, why are they foisting that on us? Don't they have something better than that? I mean, that if they were this concerned, they should have their own research. That should have been, thing number one. But there were lots and lots of other stories where the main problem was that the big papers, especially the New York Times, Washington Post, actually they doled out these scoops all over the place, but they had lots and lots of unnamed government sources who would whisper something to these reporters, and the story would fall apart like gradually over a period of days and weeks later. Like, there was a big story about how Trump had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. That was in the New York Times in February of 2017. And they didn't say whether it was witting or unwitting contact. They didn't characterize it at all. And it was sourced to 4 current and former officials. And this is another trick that people don't know about. Like, typically, that's actually one source. What you're dealing with is a high-ranking person in one of the agencies who then says, "Oh, you should talk to these 3 other people," right? And then you call those people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I heard that." I mean, some version of that tends to be the way a lot of these stories get into print, and there were so many of them. There's a few lists online, you can find them. The one I kept, there's about 45 to 55 stories, significant stories that screwed up and had to be walked back during this period.
Going back to 2016, I believe it was you who brought up the example of the Podesta leaks and the Hillary Clinton campaign's response, which was, these are, some of these are forged. We can't trust these. Yeah. And the media, you blame the media for not following up and saying, well, okay, which ones are forged?
Yeah.
I'm calling your bluff right now.
Yeah, you have to do that immediately. Right?
You're saying they didn't do their job, they didn't do their due diligence, which meant that the only way you're getting a real discussion of what's contained in those emails is through the right media and these Facebook groups and podcasts and shit like that.
Right, and this is this thing that developed in 2016. The normal reason that you don't make mistakes in print, I mean, there's a lot of reasons not to do it, among other things, just because you just don't want to. But in the old days, if you really screwed up badly, your competitor would point it out and have a laugh at your expense. But in the new kind of left and right media landscape nowadays, if you screw up, it's kind of like this unspoken thing that the CNN is not going to call it MSNBC, and the Times is not going to call it the Washington Post. The correction is going to appear in the Daily Caller or on Fox, and vice versa, right? So now your own audiences never hear about things that go wrong, and that's a major structural flaw in the press.
In the prism of manufacturing consent, so why is that? What is the sort of central thesis for why the media dropped the ball in 2016?
Well, there are so many reasons why they dropped the ball in 2016. One of them is just they had been celebrating for so long this idea that people in Washington, the press, the donors, and the parties together, what they call the invisible primary, right? They used to have this term. They would openly talk about it. The people who really decide the elections. Remember Mark Halperin before his career blew up?
Yeah. We remember Mark.
Yeah. So he used to talk about the Gang of 500, and he would openly brag about this. He's like, "Oh, there's 500 people in Washington who actually decide who gets to be president every year, and I've got my finger on the pulse of the Gang of 500, and they tell me what's going to be important this year. This year it's going to be NASCAR dads and whatever, and it's just bullshit, right? They have no idea, but they got into this habit of believing that they could tell people what was important every year and who was going to win and who could be a candidate and who couldn't be a candidate. And then Trump came along, and he was the first person who didn't just disappear when he was ordered to by the press.
He wasn't a Herman Cain.
Not to mention, you also point out how hilarious it is that they seem to have no compunction about just openly saying, yeah, in a democracy of 300 million people, it's actually these 500 guys.
Right, yeah, exactly. They don't think it's weird. They don't think it sounds weird to like.
I mean, I wish that were true. If it's only 500 people we got to take care of, then
get them in one
parody in the game. No, that's just 500 people for me to befriend and win over to my point of view.
Exactly, that's what I meant.
So among the media class, there's just a consensus.
Right.
Basically, about, we agree on the same basic precepts of society, and everything outside of that, everything outside the bounds of acceptable discourse, well, that's Looney Tune stuff.
Well, they also have the same belief about what people want.
Right.
And that is what governs, because, they would say they have normative views, but more importantly to them, to the normative views is their understanding of the electorate.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
No, this isn't going to play in Peoria or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Oh, my God.
That's the so everyone always says like DC is Hollywood for ugly people, but I'd say Hollywood has one up on DC in that most of the time they can kind of figure out what people want.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Like whether it's like an inspiring fucking superhero bullshit or like a Judd Apatow movie that's like,
well, the price
I used to drink beer and now I'm a father, type of thing. But in DC, it's just like these people who went from like, St. Chatham's great school for good boys, to Harvard, to doing their senior project in Afghanistan like Mayor Pete did, to fucking McKinsey, then to where they are now. Like they're the guy who scrubs the boils off James Einhope's feet or something, and their thought process every day is just like, I might slum it today by going to Le Pain Quotidien. Very exciting. And they're just all their days like, yeah, so what a theoretical normal person would like. And they're never right. They're never fucking right.
Never. But since they're all saying the same thing, that's the same as being right.
Right. They talk to the same 500 people. It's basically just like an insular Discord server of like the same 500 assholes. Like one will go up to the other and be like, hey, I think that stepdads who take AYSO too seriously are going to be pivotal this year. And then like asshole 2 goes to like a party of assholes and is like, did you guys know that stepdads who take AYSO too seriously are going to be the deciding factor in the Democratic primary?
What is AYSO?
The national youth soccer league. I played in it. I was not very good.
They really are guys in a Discord server bitching about how the meta is fucked up right now, and they really have to nerf Marco Rubio.
yeah, and it's just like it's the same. I think there is something that goes on in sort of insular communities where it just sort of encourages lying, because if it's a very small and pretty much the same people the entire time you're there, you want to get one up, and it's not prison where like you just become the best at like stabbing people or selling drugs. It just, in this one, you have to become the best at like knowing voter insights. And if you didn't actually know any, and just any like really good policy is just out of the question, you would just like kind of just sort of like make things up that are half intuition and half like you saw like 30 seconds of This Is Us and you're like, oh, okay, I got it. And so it's a very weird community. It is. It's very middle school.
I've said this quote on the show before, but to me it is the quote that will define political journalism for all of time. It's from Michael Barbaro, and it's from an article about how he was on paleo when he was running in Iowa, and he was about how the angle was that was going to hurt him because Iowans are a bunch of fat assholes who love to stuff their fucking faces, and his not eating as much, like not deep-throating the corn dogs at the state fair was going to alienate them. And the quote is, and it's still in my head 3 years later, this rigid abstemiousness risks putting him at a dietary distance from an electorate that still binges on carbs. And after 8 years of a tea-sipping president seeks a relatable eater-in-chief.
Oh, my God. That's beautiful.
It's to me, it's the cellar door of political journalism. I have a tattoo down my ribcage.
You couldn't do better than that.
No, you can't. It's amazing.
But that's exactly the way it is.
A relatable eater-in-chief. Like how you wrote, it was printed in the New York Times.
See, Matt, since we first made that thing, I think the funny fucked up thing about that is that he's kind of right.
It's
true. Like
Trump had all those pictures of him doing thumbs up like an idiot in front of a KFC bucket.
There are so many pictures where he's thumbs upping food. Those are like the his two favorite things are to like be next to a bunch of like just like $50 of fast food and thumbs up it, and like meet the hot generals. Those are his two favorite activities.
Sorry, just to sort of stop at one thing though. When you talk about insular communities, I think people forget it's literally an insular community.
Yeah.
Like, you
It's literally on an island.
Because you can't at a certain point of the campaign, you're walled off with the same people week after week after week after week. So you only, because of the Secret Service and the way things are organized, you go to the events, you maybe get to talk to some people in the crowd who have, of course, been selected for you to talk to by the campaigns. But for the most part, you're talking to other reporters, people who are on the plane working for the campaign, maybe some pollsters, maybe some donors. That's it. So of course it's groupthink. I mean, you're flying, and you're literally flying in a plane full of people who are only getting information from each other for weeks and months at a time. And, most people don't see that starts to become an intellectual problem after a while.
And then when they like venture outside of it, it's why we got approximately 15 million articles in 2017 that it's like, Yeah, I talked to the first dirty guy I found.
That's how Selena Zito got to become, for a minute, like a genius, because she was like, "Hey, I'll talk to regular people,
Right.
even if they're all, Republican, like, comptrollers or whatever the fuck."
Right. So the media, they got it wrong, and then Trump gets elected, and then there is just a multi-day hangover where a lot of these people just as individuals just had total anxiety breakdowns. And people were, this was, of course, an opportunity for self-reflection, that great American pastime. And, of course, various hucksters came out of the woodwork, like Selena Zito, offering false answers for why, you didn't talk to enough people laid off from the racism factory. But generally, and as I recall, you write about this, generally, the media decided on one tack, which is, okay, let's deal with reality. Trump is president, so we have to change gears and decide what being objective journalist means in this, bizarre quasi-fascist, post-truth reality. Well, which was doubling down on it's the news, goddamn you, it's the truth.
Democracy dies in darkness.
We're going to be, and the media saying we're going to be in opposition to Trump, more or less explicitly, and we're going to hold him to account from day one.
Yeah, they said it. Or they said it explicitly. There was an editorial that was passed around from journalists. Every journalist read it. It was by Jim Rutenberg in August of 2016, New York Times, and it was all about how Trump is making us rethink the norms of objectivity. And his main thesis was exactly what you said. It was basically that instead of thinking about just truth, we had to think about being true to history's judgment.
History's judgment, yeah.
History's judgment. That was the phrase. And so, everybody knew what that meant. That meant that we had to double down on, being part of the story, basically.
And you bring up in Hate Inc., you have another example about how there's like numerous examples of journalists who like their inner bullshit meter was sort of telling them something, but they felt sheepish about coming out with it because of fear of helping Trump.
Oh, totally.
And you talk about David Corn, who is one of the big Russiagate guys. Like you went on a TV show with him, then you pressed him on points of fact or like about the narrative he was presenting, and he basically responded to you with like, "Well, if you want to fact check the opposition, like you do that, but I have more important things to focus on." Yeah,
that was really weird. I mean, I didn't know David Corn very well. I knew him a little bit. We'd been friendly, I guess, but then he did the first story about the Steele Report. So he was a significant player in this whole Russia thing. And then we were both invited on a radio show. And during it, I brought up the issue that, some of these stories were going off the rails factually. And he said something about the exact phrases that's looking at the wrong end of the telescope. And
everything looks small.
It's not
big.
He told the jury to look at the facts. Then he said that the facts have no meaning.
So I wrote to him afterwards, and I'm like, well, what telescope should we be looking? I mean, we're not about anything except getting things right and wrong. If we're not doing that, then what are we? What's the point? And he his basic response was, if you want to police the anti-Trump opposition, go for it. On the list of things should I have to cover, I don't think that's very important. And I kind of understand where he's coming from, but the problem is, that's just, I don't think it's a good place to be for the business.
Well, that's an argument that I remember Glenn Greenwald making in the middle of the election in 2016, where he's kind of calling bullshit about a lot of this coverage, and is well pointing out that, the entire media class is in the tank for Hillary, which we all knew, and only the right, pointed it out, but it's an election year and we hate them. So, we don't want to give any credence to these, chuds and morons and sadists. But it is absolutely correct. And there's a sort of unspoken idea that, okay, well, when it comes to something like the Podesta leaks, we're going to walk her basically on it. And that is, and as what's Glenn's argument, I believe it's your argument as well, that actually hurts your side in the long run by stifling any kind of, what the media or the discourse is supposed to be, this open exchange of ideas and analysis and questioning.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it also very pointedly allowed Trump to run against us. Like he had an accessibility problem with his audience. He's a billionaire. He doesn't really interact with normal people. But compared to us, You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like he has the same
At
habits.
least he's on TV and he smiles at you.
He smiles. He probably watches the same porn. Like like
I don't know about that.
What most of the lamestream media did after the election was double down on exactly what got them into the same mess. And it's in that in that atmosphere, if you're not going out and actually, questioning the structures of the society, this economy, and this politics, and all of these assumptions that we've made about the neoliberal consensus and about foreign policy, then that is the perfect petri dish for hysterias like Russiagate to metastasize.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. I think. We got into this place where we weren't examining what the point was exactly, and we allowed Trump to caricaturize us, and rather than draw the conclusion that he had successfully portrayed the press as being in the tank for Hillary and all that, we became that even more, and we chased the wrong story.
Another thing I really liked in Hate Inc. So speaking to Virgil's point about the ongoing anxiety breakdown and hysteria of the media post,
and some of these people
2016
some of these people
election.
were decent writers, and we've just lost them forever.
The thing that you zero in on that's honestly been one of my favorite things to follow, even from afar, is this bizarre conversion of journalists into like spy talk.
Oh my god!
Where now everyone says things like "sig int" and "compromat" without batting an eye, and it's just like, where did all this come from? Like, what the fuck? Like,
I know. It was so embarrassing, and where you saw it the most was in the profiles of Steele, because most people if they had any exposure to him at all, they met him a couple of times, but he basically wasn't available to most reporters. But literally every physical description that you ever saw in a John le Carré novel was applied to Steele. He was a gray man. He was unassuming. If you walked into a room, you wouldn't have seen him. It was all this stuff.
His wife is having an affair that he just found out about. The guy who's also a traitor.
They even called him that there was some like a more self-effacing smiley or something like that. Like they openly compared him to that. It's because, look, a lot of journalists are failed lit majors like me, like they wanted to go into the movies or something. So they have a tendency to try to force character types onto real people. And, and Robert Mueller became Elliot Ness and Steele became George Smiley. And then the spy talk, look, it would have been easier to take if they had been able to get simple shit right. Like the New York Time magazine did a thing that was half the White House, and I think they meant it to be half the Kremlin, but they put St. Basil's Cathedral instead, right? So it's literally like if you put the Kremlin and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, like that's what it looks like to Russians. The St. Basil's Cathedral, the one with the onion domes, is a church. You know what I mean? They got that wrong. That's like upside down. The New York Times did the same graphic basically. They kept continually mixing up the Soviet Union and Russia. Like there's hammers and sickles everywhere. What
was the Donna Brazil quote where she says like the communists are in charge?
The communists, they're dominating the debate. The communists haven't been around since 1990. Like what's wrong with you?
It's drivel. It's absolute drivel.
Yeah, I mean it was nuts, and they were drawing on the sort of archaic feelings people had about the Soviet Union, and okay, I get that, but it makes us look stupid when we do this stuff.
And these are political and media elites, people with at minimum large audiences, and perhaps just the ear of famous people. In fact, some of them are actually legislators themselves with an actual fucking job that impacts hundreds of millions of people. Just buying into this, pandering to it, or just otherwise just exposing themselves as just gormless idiots.
This is classic Disinformatskaya.
That was like how much of it? Like
you're all doing Disinformatskaya.
Honest question. This is an honest question. How much of that do you think was just like midlife crisis? Like, because I kind of like when I looked at it initially, you're like, shut the fuck up. But it is like just a gasp for excitement, or like any type of it's a good job to be like a political reporter. Like, I will make fun of you, my friends will make fun of you, but that honestly doesn't matter. You can see, wait, don't
you can
tell me
survive
live.
that.
Yeah, it's not going to harm you. You can fucking go on a fly fishing trip that you paid $13,000 for because you don't know anyone who fly fishes. Your son is going to the new school to write a new type of play that's even worse than the original kind.
Rachel Maddow was trout fishing last week, by the way. But
That was great.
Yes.
She cut the fly fishing vacation short to come back because the news was happening.
Sorry. The news never comes
And
off the line.
was when it was released, right? So nothing was out yet.
right.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing for her to say other than, "Oh, it's here."
Well, except that we knew there were no indictments. So that was.
All right,
Yeah.
yes.
But it is
So she stopped her vacation to be like, yeah.
But it is like you're bored because the only thing that, like, as I've said, the only thing that keeps you going in life is novelty or a sense of meaning. And I guess they had neither. And this gave them both.
Well,
Yeah.
look, a lot of people who went into the journalism business, especially, people who are like my age, right, who, went to college in the 80s or early 90s, it was All the President's Men was a big thing. Everybody wanted to be Woodward or Bernstein, like that's why a lot of people went into this business. So they're always looking for Watergate. That's why there's so many stories with gates on the end of them, right?
I hate that. The second I found out what Watergate was as a kid, I was like, wait, that's just the name of the hotel. Even as a kid, I was like, this is so fucking stupid.
Another example, in terms like the spy speak, another idiotic thing that we now have to think about that's driven journalists crazy is this idea about the Russian bots. That the bots are like manipulating discourse through Facebook and Twitter, and you can never know if the person responding to you is real or if it's just someone wearing a tracksuit like I am, in a basement, like
with wraparound shades.
Yeah, exactly. Just,
We're
typing
really not undermining the whole narrative since both I and Will are wearing tracksuits right now.
But
Russians are really into bad tracksuits, by the way. I can confirm that.
But yeah, like their image of the bot farms and the Russian hackers, like, is just they're just painting with words a stock photo, and you can see the Shutterstock fucking watermark on a guy dressed in all black with the shades at a keyboard, and you see the monitor and it says access granted.
No, but Matt, one of the things you talk about in Hate Inc. because that I didn't know about, but could you talk about, what is it, this firm New Knowledge?
New Knowledge, yeah.
This is a really good little gem.
This is just unbelievable. Like, so the government, there were all these sort of quasi-governmental sort of agencies and think tanks that popped up around, because what happens when you have something like this is that everybody wants to cash in. So all of a sudden, somebody will put together a think tank whose job it is to, investigate Russian cyber warfare or whatever the hell it is. So they'll grab somebody from the Pentagon and then they'll ask for a grant and they'll get it. But there's this company called New Knowledge, which
great name.
Yeah, which suddenly became like, they were writing reports for the Senate. They were a main source for a lot of news stories for the Washington Post, the New York Times, basically talking about how Russian bots were trying to sow division, which is this phrase that popped up.
Talk about like washing our hands of anything wrong with this country. Is this like this other idea that like anything that's bad about America is just being stoked by Russia?
Yeah,
like
Black
all our
Lives
racial
Matter,
divisions or any of
yeah.
that. Like they're exploiting that.
Totally. No, that was in the original. Well, I can go on forever about that. But anyway,
New Knowledge.
So
yeah.
new knowledge. So it cut. So they did a story. The New York Times did a story like at the beginning of last year about how Russian bots were trying to stoke division over the Parkland shooting, right? And the first person they quoted was this guy Jonathan Morgan from New Knowledge, who was an information warfare specialist who was very held in very high regard by the United States government. And then it comes out like 9 months later, I think it was this Scott Shane, one of the Times' own reporters, finds out that New Knowledge was faking Russian bot activity in the Alabama Senate election. Like they were trying. The whole idea was they were trying to make it look like Russian bots preferred Roy Moore, right? And so they were trying to discredit Roy Moore in the Senate race by releasing news stories that Russian bots were doing something to help Roy Moore.
But also, most of these stories of information cyber warfare are just stories about somebody just made a Twitter account and just like picked a photo of a guy holding a fish and put in the avatar.
Exactly.
And just retweeted fucking Glenn Greenwald or
I've
something.
seen government created account. Like you can tell when there's. So you know how the Saudis opened that posting center
Oh yeah,
with the orb.
with the orb.
I've seen what those accounts are like. It's just like it'll be like a guy named like Great Khalid 3844220, and he'll just like if anyone says anything about Saudi Arabia, he'll be like, "You're a liar. What about Rosa Parks?" It's just no one cares. No one cares.
That's the thing. These are stories that just prey on the technological ineptitude of old people.
Right.
Over and over again. Most of the stories, you just look at them, and if you have any kind of familiarity with social media or HTML or anything like that, you see that it's just bullshit.
I remember like a few years ago, like every time a reporter would like, they'd be like, they would post like Trump lied and think it was just they were amazed. They would take a
Oh
lap
my God,
around their computer.
they just
And then like of course like they'd be like, oh, I guess the MAGA people of or should I say bots, and it would be like it would be a guy named like Rifle Jim 38000, like a bunch of numbers. And they'd be like, oh, interesting that you have no profile picture. It's like, yeah, that's how a boomer would use the computer. I know how that works. It would just be like, it would be like Rifle Jim being like, you're the lying fake news. And be like, oh, I'm being targeted by the Russian government.
That's why the bot thing is a perfect example of how the personal is political, because the bot thing not only excuses all of our social ills, racism, gun violence, psychosis, and our general clannishness and violent distrust of one another. That's all just bot stoking things.
Right, yeah, Russian
and then
bots. Yeah.
Personally, when someone tweets at me that I'm a hack and a shithead and my hat makes me look like I have a penis face, I can say that is also a bot. Well, I think so. Not only is my country good, I am also good, and anyone who says otherwise is a robot from Moscow.
What I also want to know is, and like every time I see one of these stories, I always, this is what my head goes to is, let's say, the Russian government is paying tracksuit guys to make fake American profiles and, Resistance Kelly 53 and say, well, what about Juanita Broderick? So what is that illegal? What's your strategy here? Russians can't use the internet and say stupid things like Americans can.
I love the idea of nuking Russia because somebody replied to because they paid a guy to be rude to fucking Jim Acosta on Twitter. Oh my God! If that's how human civilization ended, that would have rolled. I would have been happy with it.
Go back and look at when the GRU when Mueller did his indictment of the GRU guys. That's the Russian intelligence agency, and these are the people who supposedly, were involved with this whole operation. That and the Internet Research Agency. People went on TV and said, "We are at war with Russia." Right?
I remember that.
This was an act of war. Like, no, they fucking tweeted at us. You know what I mean? What's wrong with you?
I mean, I know that's never. I love how people, whenever they talk about the indictments that Mueller or the Mueller investigation led to, a big chunk of them are these GRU guys. That's never gonna fucking be a trial ever,
right? Yeah,
because they're not gonna fucking get extradited,
right?
I just wish they would, because I would love to see that trial where they've got a big blown up thing and they're like, now, Mr. Grigorovich here, it says this right here where it says that you're replying to Jim Acosta with Sarah Huckabee Sanders is dummy thick. Now, sir, were you responsible for this tweet, sir?
I love the idea. If you're like the GRU guy who has to, they're like, all right, your job is that you reply to the Scott Dworkin guy and say it's fake news.
Funder.
You have to be like, God damn it! Like all my friends are doing so much cool shit.
Yeah,
they're out there killing oligarchs in the UK. I'm the fucking posting guy. I'm the guy who replies to Chris Hayes this fucking sucks. I'm gonna go back to school.
Yeah, it's the end of Miracle on 34th Street, and just guys bringing sack after sack of printouts of Jake Tapper's mentions.
I could be garroting a police chief in Donbass right now.
You have to want to kill yourself if you're like a Russian paid reply guy.
You asked for the transfer to Kyrgyzstan, like that moment, like, you know, send me back to the worst fucking hole, and Arzamas 17 or whatever it is. Yeah.
I should have taken that job drinking until I pass out every day in my dad's backyard in the family business. So we're unsure how it makes money, where we drive an ATV into a brick wall every day.
So that's hysteria. It's, you know, something that we've said on the show is that QAnon, Russiagate is the liberals' QAnon, and we just watched the prophecy fail, and everyone doubling down on it. They're going to they demand the report. Of course, they should publish the report, and they will publish the report.
And look, let's be clear, there'll be shit in it.
Oh yeah. That'll be more grist for us to talk about and pick over. But I assume the base conclusions that Andy Barr laid out in the memo are true, and that's the thing we have to reckon with. The report will have redactions, and they're gonna demand the unredacted report, just like the QAnon people demanded the unredacted report. And what makes this actually a perfect one-to-one is that for months now, Q has said, actually, the Mueller investigation is investigating the pedo crimes of fucking John Podesta and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and that's going to lead to them all being sent to Guantanamo. So we will be in a situation where both the Q people and the resistance people will be demanding the same unredacted report.
Look. All right, I'm a centrist. I'm a big fan of grant bargaining. We execute Hillary and Trump at Guantanamo Bay and replace them with holograms.
That would be great if it just turned out, these have all been actors since like early 2017.
Everyone is a hologram created by their execution.
Yeah, I'd take that. I definitely would. Yeah.
So I mean, like, just wrapping up, like, at the end of the day, like, this is an honest question. At this point, what can one honestly say about Donald Trump's ties to Russia, if anything at all, that can be fairly said about his relationship with, like, either Russians or like the Russian government?
Well, I think
which are two very different things. Obviously.
I think he's Russia curious, right? I mean, I think that's pretty clear.
It is a land of contrasts.
Yeah, I mean, there were some meetings there. Look, I had the misfortune, incidentally, to actually run into some of the same people. The woman he had the meeting with at the Trump Tower, I actually know who those people are. It's a company called Prevezon. They're involved in this. Anyway, the point is, they did have an interest, and there is some political synergy between Donald Trump and some of the things that the Russians are into. Like, Trump has talked from the beginning of his campaign, and I'm pretty sure this had nothing to do with Russia, but he talked about how NATO is kind of a crappy deal for America. Like, like, it was invented to oppose the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. The member countries don't pay their bills. All that stuff is true, He started talking about that. There are some other things where his policies were sort of in line with Obama's on Syria. Like, his calculation was the lesser evil is let's join up with Putin and fight ISIS. So I think, Trump is he's the kind of person who probably admires Putin because Putin is the kind of person that Trump wishes he was, like a self-made criminal tough guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As opposed to having it handed to him by his daddy. Like, Putin is the real thing. Putin is a bad motherfucker. You know what I mean? And I think he does have a natural affinity for him.
Well,
but that's not against the law, and he openly ran against it. He openly ran on this. That's the thing that I think people don't point out.
He probably has a bunch of laundered money that they put through all of his real estate holdings because that's all he's useful for is like a pass through for other money that can't be openly disclosed.
But of course, that describes the entire New York real estate business industry.
That's the thing. They want to make it. That's one of the big reasons for Russiagate is because you have to particularize it. Because if you generalize it, then the entire ruling class is just as crooked as him. Well, that can't be the case.
That's a huge thing. Is if they actually started opening the door on like Saudi money, UAE money, like Chinese money, like all their interference, like everybody.
And you want to talk about fucking bots and shit? Israel
Right. Yes, of course.
They had a huge investment in getting Democrats out of there, reversing the Iran deal, and they have a fucking Hasbara network. They have those posting centers just like the Saudis do and like Russia does.
They have some really advanced models in their posting center. The guy who said that saying Palestine is like dead naming a trans person.
That's so good.
That guy is like the highest. That's T1000.
No, yeah.
That fucking guy.
No, he's a tier 1 posting operator for sure.
Yeah, the Russian guys are just like, you're gay. Mitch McConnell rocks. And
Or
it's
like
okay, buddy.
they hire.
However, as you pointed out, Felix, though, the Russian posters do have the ability to warg into animals.
It's
so
true.
that's pretty.
Or
good.
the
Russians do have
Russians
warging
hire-
powers.
They hire 2 guys from Ghana to do a YouTube channel saying that Hillary's a witch doctor. It gets like 1,000 fucking views.
But that thing about like Trump admiring Putin, that was a thing on TCOT, like, who are all dead now, rest in peace. They all died of natural causes in 2014. But they, like the people who were like the Benghazi people who unified on Twitter, their thing would be like post a side by side of, like, look at Barack Obama's gay bicycle next to Putin's awesome horse. Where he's shirtless. Like, do you remember those?
Oh,
Where
they
it'd
were
be like,
great.
this is what a real leader looks like. And that wasn't, they didn't have any opinion on like NATO or anything either. They were just like, this guy is strong. I bet he could. It's the same mindset as being like, oh, what if Ozzy Osbourne beat up Justin Bieber for being a gay girl? Like, it's the same thing. There's no geopolitical thing going on there.
And look, there's also a simpatico with just their look. I was there when Putin came to power. One of the reasons he was popular is because he opposed like neoliberal politics. Like, that we were trying to impose on Russia through Yeltsin, and
and also being very intensely nationalistic. As
right,
well,
exactly. He was a complete. The whole idea was instead of stealing all the money and sending it to France, right, we're going to steal all the money and keep it here, right? And that was basically his platform, and he became hugely popular for that. And it was very much directed at the kind of Western neoliberal consensus, and his argument was basically these people came into our country for 10 years. They told us what to do. Everything got screwed up because of it. We had, our economy's a mess, and now we're gonna run our own thing. And look, it was a very similar argument to what Trump made when he ran. So there's that whole thing too. Which is definitely a factor.
What has been the most galling about all the Russiagate stuff and all the pandering, especially from members of Congress, from guys like what's his name, Eric Swalwell, who's one of those big guys, right? Has been these crass appeals to patriotism.
Ugh.
And I saw one of them pontificate the other day that if the Russians approached me, a foreign government approached me and said, I have information about your opponent, I'd do the right thing and call the FBI. And it's like, if the Russians approached me with information about another podcast, I wouldn't call the FBI. I don't care. And that's been my thing about all of this. Because even if their greatest fantasy is true, and Trump is the Manchurian candidate, and Lyndon LaRouche was right, and that the Russians have taken over the government, and any day now the American flag is going to go down, and a hammer and sickle is going to go up. They're going to blow up Mount Rushmore and put up, Lenin and Stalin and Khrushchev and all these guys. And then there's going to be tanks and missiles going down your city street,
right, instead of underdog at the Thanksgiving Day parade,
and then suddenly your boss is speaking Russian. I don't care. Like, that's owned is my answer. That's just chickens coming home to roost.
If the Russians contacted me with information, I would just treat it like any other telemarketing call. Honestly, it'd just be like, who cares, man? I thought this was my food. Shut up.
I was gonna say, you got the 3 minutes until my ramen's ready.
But I can't. The thing is, the people who have they've drunk the Kool-Aid, they've gone nuts. Like, I can't blame them. Just on a human level, if we're talking about it as a pathology, because the past few years have been genuinely terrifying and have proven to all of us our utter powerlessness as individuals. And watching the mainstreaming of racism and the increasing brutality of our society, the way we're treating refugees, so on and so forth, it is enough to break the brain of any sensible, empathetic human being.
Of course.
And it's and again, another parallel with QAnon is that the Russiagate stuff gave you, a media consumer, someone watching MSNBC, somebody who's posting on the resistance hashtags, it gave you the illusion of control, the illusion of interactivity, because you get to play a part in this spy novel now. You get to say things like SIGINT, and you get to put together the clues. And if you put together all the clues,
It's like watching,
you win a prize.
Carmen Sandiego.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is the exact same appeal as QAnon. It's this gigantic ARG for people who have yet to recognize just their utter powerlessness.
The 9/11
sublating
truth
it,
was similar in that way too. I mean, I think a lot of people after 9/11.
Yeah, you wrote a great article on 9/11 conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I mean, I think people were genuinely freaked out, and the notion that a couple of a relatively disorganized group of people could actually pull this off was too horrifying to people. Like it was actually more of a relief to imagine that George Bush had done it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Folks, I want to apologize to our listener. I didn't know we would have a left gatekeeper on the show. Google Building 7.
Google Tower 7, everybody. All right, I think we should leave it there, but I just want to say, Matt Taibbi, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Virgil, Felix.
Hate Inc.
Pleasure.
Hate Inc. We will have a link to it in the show description.
Taibbi.substack.com. And again, I highly recommend you subscribe.
Excellent. Thank you.